Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News, and as Mercedes challenged for the first time this season for a victory at the Silverstone Grand Prix, there could be yet more good news on the horizon for this team. They believe that both Red Bull and Ferrari have been exploiting a loophole in the regulations to gain an unfair competitive advantage. When the new technical directive comes in for the French Grand Prix, if it works in the way Mercedes are expecting it to, it could well peg back the pace that Red Bull and Ferrari are able to put down at the present time. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Going to do my best to explain absolutely everything today and what this could potentially mean for the championship battle going forwards. Couple of key pieces of news to start out the video though. Provisional calendar for 2023. Season starts March the 5th in Bahrain. Apparently 23, 24 races depending on whether China goes ahead. Belgium and France, the provisional dropouts. So Paul Ricard, and also that of course Spa itself, we talked for quite some time. Spa could be out for various reasons, but yeah, apparently that's looking closer to being a reality for next season. Seemingly people want it to be kind of like a rotating Grand Prix, the FIA say, or like F1 say. Maybe they want to do it like every other year or something, which would be a tragedy, but it seems that more and more likely at this point. South Africa is returning, and Las Vegas on November the 18th. So there's some further details on that one. Also, Fernando Alonso, kind of a remarkable statistic that came out after yesterday's race. He's recently actually broke the record for the longest ever Formula 1 career. He's now broken the record for the longest ever distance anyone has ever raced in the history, a quarter of the way to the moon, 2.3 times around the earth, all these marathons and all this type of stuff as well. And even as Alonso quote tweets, let's make it at least halfway to the moon. So he wants to double up the numbers he's done so far. Not sure how old he'd be if he got to that level, but certainly showing the commitment to keep racing for a long time to come. And certainly the way he's driving right now, there's no reason why he can't do exactly that. Now, of course, look, so far this season, Red Bull, Ferrari, they've been dominating everything in terms of pole positions. It's 7-3 in favour of Ferrari. In terms of race wins, it's 7-3 the other way around. Now, of course, Mercedes want to get in the fight here, right, and actually win races and get pole positions, this type of stuff as the season progresses. Certainly their car yesterday was the most competitive it has been all season long in the hands of Lewis Hamilton around Silverstone, but still, there might yet be more to come, not just because they're going to do further upgrades, but maybe because Red Bull and Ferrari might get pegged back by what they believe is a loophole in the regulations. I was seeing tweets like this yesterday. Actually, when you think about it, Hamilton was the winning legal car. So this is I was kind of wondering, okay, what exactly is all this about? But yeah, if you kind of look into it, Mercedes seem to believe that there's been a loophole exploited right now by the likes of Red Bull and Ferrari themselves. And it's also kind of interesting when you think about the fact that Red Bull and Ferrari have been kind of very against the new technical directive, saying the FIA shouldn't be able to control this type of stuff, maybe because they're trying to hide something they might be doing, which has actually been mentioned specifically in the technical directive itself. We shall see that here in a second. So this is what Toto Wolff from Mercedes said before the weekend began. A bit of a surprise to say the least, more of a shocker, expressing amazement about a certain, rule exploit a particular area of the flexibility rules. Effectively, the way that the FIA has written the regulations means that there's kind of a way around it the Mercedes haven't exploited, but certainly the whole idea is it's not in the spirit of the regulations to do what apparently, Red Bull and Ferrari are doing right now to kind of get around the rules. Let's see what Toto had to say here, right? So the idea of this technical directive was that teams that, effectively if their car's bouncing too much, the FIA can say, no, you have to raise the ride height to prevent that happening. Now, as it's turned out since Baku, the team seem to have kind of got on top of this a bit more. Toto Wolff himself even said that the Mercedes wasn't bouncing pretty much at all around Silverstone yesterday. But there was a second part of this technical directive issued, which has generally been overlooked, with the FIA focusing on plank wear and flexibility as it considers these to be inherently related to the same issues and goes hand in hand with the metric they're going to try and come up with on what is an appropriate level of oscillation. Wolff said this is the interesting part, that some teams have been stretching that maybe somewhat too much. Now, you're going on to say the following. Effectively, there's some skids on the underside of these cars. They're not allowed to deflect more than 2mm at two specific positions, at the leading edge of the plank and slightly further back. The idea being that they're not allowed to deflect more than 2mm at all in any situation. However, they only test them at the leading edge of the plank and slightly further back. Therefore, there are no measurements taken at the rear around where the driver sits, as some teams are believed to have been engineering to the mounting of the plank and the skid block in such a way that gives a degree of cushioning. Apparently, these skids on some cars are flexing up to about 6mm, 3 times as much than should be allowed, because the FIA don't test in those particular spots. Therefore, effectively, they can get away with it. And now they're clamping down on this. Now, seemingly, Mercedes believe that Red Bull and Ferrari have been doing exactly this, and it does give them seemingly a competitive advantage here that we'll explain here in a second. So it's only meant to be 2mm deflection. Mercedes believe that Red Bull might have been going up to 6mm. Now, even as Toto Wolff says, nobody had any idea anyone was doing this until the FIA brought it up, which is a great surprise to all of the teams, because what's in the regulations and the intent of the regulations, it's pretty clear. There is an argument why they could deflect more than what's in the regs. Bit of a surprise to say the least, more of a shocker. And the implication is there that from France, this won't be accepted. Any cars with this solution in place will be required to make changes in order to not be considered in breach of those two regulations. Horner says, of course, that his cars fully conform. He's not going to say that Red Bull believe they're breaking the regulations, right? He's going to say they think their car fully conforms. informs. We shall see if the FIA agrees when it comes to the French Grand Prix. It's Austria up next, then the French Grand Prix right after that. So definitely an interesting one, right? And even Andrew Chauvelin says from the Mercedes side, when it came to light, we realised there were opportunities we have perhaps not been taking or exploiting. It won't affect how we run the car. It may well be affecting our competitors, and by virtue of that, we move a little bit closer, right? So excited to hear Chauvelin about the possibility that Red Bull and Ferrari may have to take a step backwards as a result of this. So I believe the theory is behind this, that because they deflect more, the teams can run the cars with slightly higher rake, which ends up effectively generating more downforce on the car without worrying about the bouncing that would be created by these skids if they didn't deflect. So in Mercedes' case, they can't seem to raise the rake as high as Red Bull can, for example, because if these skids, as they currently work, as they currently do, then Mercedes deal with the bouncing or get the effectively like a mechanical bouncing of the car, bouncing on the bottom of the track, not the porpoising issue, whereas Red Bull don't necessarily have that because their skids deflect more than it should be allowed. It's effectively the theory going on right now, and Horner and Binotto have both said that they're not happy about that these technical regulations are coming into effect at all, a dangerous avenue to go down. Maybe they have a point, but I'm sure Mercedes are thinking, maybe they're just saying this to try and make sure this doesn't happen and potentially eat into their advantage. So even though we actually saw this back in Baku, when there was some analysis going on, Karim was kind of showing Toto the difference between the way the two cars, the Red Bull and the Mercedes, were set up and why it seemed like the Red Bull was bouncing less than the Mercedes, or exactly what the difference was. And they were talking about the rake and the difference in effectively the ride height to the cars at the back of the vehicle. This was kind of, if you guys are unfamiliar with the term rake, it refers to the sloping of the car from the front to the rear. So this is not this year's cars, this is previous year's cars, but usually Mercedes went with a low rake car, as in the front of the car is obviously close to the ground, but the back of the car is not too high up, whereas you can see Red Bull has a much higher rake angle than the Mercedes has done. Now this year teams have been experimenting with the rake angle, and apparently what Red Bull are up to right now is certainly helping them on this front. Now a great interesting actual piece here from I'll kind of break it down for you guys from Submitten on the Reddit, explaining his perspective on this. Like in the technical regulations, you're allowed, this certain element, and this is kind of some pictures from his perspective on the other side of the car. The Red Bull have been putting these titanium supports in kind of this location and this location, and not exactly where it would get tested, potentially allowing it to deflect more in other locations. Apparently Ferrari have been trying a similar thing. This is a 2018 Ferrari where that's not the case at all, and the images of the Ferrari aren't quite so clear, but even as he says, Red Bull have cut out in their carbon floor where the reinforcement goes, maybe to affix them to a rigid part of the chassis. So really interesting technical discussion here, and this is what the actual regulations themselves say, that the FIA reserves the right to introduce further load and deflection test on any part of the bodywork which appears to be or is expected of moving whilst the car is in motion. This is the theory from Mercedes. This is what is happening with the Red Bull car and potentially the Ferrari car as well. So definitely tweet your thoughts on this one, because it seems possible that when we go to the French Grand Prix and this technical directive officially comes into place, they may introduce further tests to make sure that this isn't happening on the Red Bull car or the Ferrari, and of course potentially other cars as well. But Mercedes would be mentioning it if they didn't think that the top teams were doing that themselves. Red Bull apparently say they're not concerned about the legality of its flaws. We shall see if anything changes over the coming weeks or so. There was also talk about the possibility of what's going to happen going forwards. Is it possible that things change around next year, even as Horner says effectively stop messing around with the regulations? But that's kind of the thing, right? Christian Horner, understandably, all the team principals, whatever they say and whatever they seem to believe on the public facing perspective is always going to be from a beneficial perspective to their team. Of course Horner doesn't want the regulation to change, maybe because there's they're going to think, okay, well, if we have to make these slightly stiffer in the places that we were kind of exporting this a little bit, the kind of hole in the regulations, and now that's going to be sewn up, then maybe Mercedes gain a little bit of time, which might be all they need to take them back to the front, especially with Hamilton driving as he was around Silverstone yesterday, the fastest man on track on average throughout the Grand Prix. Now, of course, there has been some discussion, maybe these changes won't come into effect until next year, it might not be a disaster at all, but still, it is an interesting point. The Mercedes believe they have been exploiting the rules, and for the French Grand Prix in a couple of weeks' time, things could change around once again. A track that theoretically should be decent for the Mercedes guys as well. Even that's kind of what Anthony Davidson says right here, that he believes the French Grand Prix will maybe be the next race that suits the Mercedes car, and in comparison with the new technical directives coming in, if of course Mercedes car isn't bouncing as it wasn't around Silverstone, the bouncing part of the regs won't be an issue for Mercedes as they were first thought to be. That was the thing, right? Mercedes were pushing for these regulations, they come in, and then Helmut Marko from Red Bull says, backfired on Mercedes because now their kind of bouncing phenomenon is actually going to affect them worse. But now it's almost looking at the other way around, and it might actually be, beneficial to Mercedes, right? So that's the politics of Formula 1, but look, we'll see how this story develops over the coming days and weeks. But Toto Wolff isn't getting too optimistic yet. He says, okay, we had moments where we saw some light at the end of the tunnel. The next 3 street circuits proved we were wrong about exactly the progress they've made. But this W13 does seem to kind of thrive around, let's say, more traditional racetracks at times. And with the progress they've made, plus the possibility of the other guys stepping back, it definitely creates an exciting finale. Because, look, the racing we saw yesterday was just phenomenal. Ferraris fighting Mercedes, fighting Red Bulls, just fantastic. That's what we want to see for the rest of the season. And hopefully it'll make for an absolutely fantastic rest of the year. But yes, it's Austria next up. Of course, the French Grand Prix after that. Excited to get back to this circuit because, well, it's a rather exciting one potentially for racing as well. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.